Okay, we got everybody in or enough?
Okay, everybody should be in the classroom now for us here. So go ahead, Curtis and Lonnie.
Righty. Well, welcome back, folks. I know we're kind of getting late in the day, so we'll try to make this presentation as interactive as we can. And so the intent behind this presentation is we're going to talk a little bit about initial attack and extended attack. And this is kind of a conversation about how that workflow or how that incident progresses and how that communication flows and how do we work together to actually fight this fire together. So let's get into it. So our goals today, we're going to talk a little bit about A and operational roles. We'll talk about the importance of leaders' intent and how that can be conveyed. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of cradle to grave initial attack to post-burn rehab planning. This is if you're a Forest Service employee, it probably means bear teams. If it's BLM, you're probably talking about ES&R funds, those kinds of things. We're going to talk about some key elements to leaders or to the delegation of authority. We're going to dig a little bit more into how we communicate as a team and how we make decisions, both at the initial attack phase and extended attack, including ordering incident management teams, and then different resource protection considerations. Anything else on this, Lonnie?
Nope.
We have lots of fun cartoons. How do I make this go away? Okay. There we go. Okay. I invented fire, but maybe I should have figured out what the antidote is. So I guess in the chat, and Ed, you'll have to monitor this for me because I can't see it, but in the chat, what are some of the things that we discussed about the pre-season? What are some of the things that we wanted to have dialed in an order? Lonnie, maybe you can see it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in there, Curtis, you're getting training requirements, agreements, local operating plans, training, have the meetings that help develop relationships, WFDS, preparedness plans, plan reviews, staffing, FDOT.
Awesome.
You're getting a lot of response in there.
Yep. All the above, right? And just a quick tech check. Ed, can you see the chat that I just pulled up? Or is it just showing the presentation?
You're just on the presentation.
Oh, good. So I can see it. Okay. So pre-seasons, you guys nailed it. We're meeting with our partners. We're talking, we're doing training. We're putting people through their paces. We're laying out clear expectations of our staff. We're having different discussions with leadership teams. We're getting our delegations of authority in place for our own staff. What else, Lonnie? What else are we talking about?
Yeah, it's important to do your preparedness reviews, get your red cards all ready, make sure that your delegations are all in place, make sure that your operating plans are all signed and ready to go, that the dispatch centers have their delegation of authority, their financial plans all set, that you have your maps and your operational duty officer delegation all ready to go. There's a variety of different things. Those are some ticklers. I think we've discussed a lot of those throughout the previous sessions.
Hammered along a lot of these this week. So maybe you're doing some simulations with your partners, those kinds of things. All right. So now we're into fire season, initial attack. So here's what I'd like you to do in your groups. Let's take, I think we got some time here. Let's take the next, say, 7 minutes. Let's take 7 minutes. And from an operations standpoint, I want you to talk about what are the things that you want the agency administrator to know when you give them a call. And from an agency administrator standpoint, what do you want to know from your duty officer? And what do you want to share with your operations team? So you've got a brand new fire. Your duty officer has received a phone call from dispatch saying you got a fire. So now you're going to relay that information up to your agency administrator. So let's have a conversation about what kind of information sharing do we want to have. So let's take the next 7 minutes. Let's be back here 52 after the hour. Sound good? So, all right. So let's start with group one. Ben, why don't we take that first question? Operations. What do you want your agency administrator to know when you give them a call?
Yeah, so a lot of it was values at risk. Brought up, for example, my neck of the woods might be whether that's in or adjacent to a timber sale area. What do you expect for fire growth? All of that, and ICs on the ground, and specific to the location. Of just wanting to know that administrator to have that information to be able to look at the big picture of what's around there.
Awesome.
And help
Thanks.
me out if I missed anything else there from the rest of group one. So
That's perfect. Let's go to group three. What did you guys talk about? Operations standpoint, what do you want your agency administrator to know?
What you got first off the bat, how big it is, where it's at, which side of the fence is it on, whose jurisdiction, did it start on us or start on them, or fuels, weather, where's it going to go, what can you expect?
Perfect. Yep, absolutely. What about let's go to group 5. Let's try the agency administrator one. What do you want to know as an agency administrator, and what do you want to share with your operations?
Quinn? No.
You have somebody from group 5?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So we drilled down into the values at risk and risk to the firefighters, just making sure that the intended action was, all aligned with what the agency and what we want to do with this fire. We did talk a lot about jurisdictional boundaries too, being something that agency administrator would definitely want to know about. But the briefing kind of covered all of that, so we didn't have any questions.
Great. Let's do one more. Group 7. What are your agency administrators? What do you want to know? And what do you want your duty officer to share with you?
Yeah, definitely want to know location. I want to know outlook and potential, any jurisdictional needs. Do we have cooperators engaged? What does the fire management officer need from me in terms of support there? And then what are the closest values at risk?
Perfect. Lonnie, anything you hear?
Yeah, this is all real good. I think you guys nailed it. The only thing I'd add is one thing for units to consider is we've actually added this right into our delegation of authority that we have for our agency administrators. And, it says right in there, the expectations are that we're going to share the approximate size, the location, what county that fire is in, the estimate of BLM acres that are actively burning, already burned or threatened, the partners that are on the fire, types of ownership, if there's any no man's land there, what the results of your complexity analysis is thus far, critical resources and the infrastructures at risk. And that's it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
something to consider for units.
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add to all of that is, as an agency administrator, I kind of like to know who we're sending to the incident, from our own team. I like to know who's going. Like to know who's the IC. In Central Washington, we have a lot of threat fires to BLM. And so it's very likely that we'll get a phone call saying that there's a fire that's not on BLM yet, but it's certainly threatening. And so it's not uncommon for a local fire chief or, DNR IC or Forest Service IC to be managing that fire. And so having a clear picture of who's running that incident is important to me. I also like to just kind of ask our duty officer, what do you think it's going to do? Is this thing going to get really big, really fast, or is it something that you think we can catch? And those folks know that, that they're going to give me their very best assessment as the subject matter expert based on the information they have at the time. And even if the answer is, I don't know yet, but, and if they're wrong, that's okay. But at least gives me kind of a frame of reference to start thinking about what's this going to do. And
Yeah.
the only
Also,
other thing I would say,
aviation resources, if those are being ordered, if there's archaeological resources that need to be considered there, if dozers are being considered for the suppression tactic, and then any potential evacuations, your agency administrator certainly needs to know about that ahead of time.
all good stuff. So you guys pretty much hit on all of this stuff. So you're going to get the initial call. What are some of the questions that you want to ask? And what do you want to say? We talked through a lot of that already. We talked a little bit about duty officers earlier in the week, but basically your duty officer, and Lonnie can expand on this, but your duty officer is going to be kind of the person who's running the show. They're the final authority, I guess, when it comes to initial attack. And so they're making those decisions when they get the phone call from dispatch saying you have an incident. They're making decisions on who to send. Are we ordering aircraft or not? And they're doing that in communication with the agency administrator. So, want anything to add on that piece?
You bet. No, that duty officer role is really important, and our dispatch centers honor that too. So there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen. Keep in mind, if you have run cards, if it's a confirmed fire, the dispatch center should be implementing run cards for the appropriate level. And then, a duty officer role would be to either augment that run card with some additional resources, or perhaps, maybe lessen it. That would be an appropriate role from a duty officer too, especially in the event of multiple ignitions or something like that. They can also declare what's called the lightning plan in that scenario, and that omits or puts the run cards on pause, and the duty officer can start prioritizing multiple incidents and work with the line officer and figure out with what resources and capabilities they have, which fires they are going to respond to.
Most often your incident commanders on these initial attack incidents are going to be your in-house resources or those of your partners. So they're typically going to be your engine captains, your fire operations supervisors, maybe even assistant engine captain, something like that. Most units have a couple of IC3s on hand if things get a little bit more complex. So those are typically going to be the folks you're going to be communicating with during that initial call. As an agency administrator, it's really important that we lay out clear expectations and leaders' intent. Preferably, we would have had this conversation early in the season, at least laying the foundational elements of what our leaders' intent is and what we expect of those folks. And then you're augmenting that or just kind of supplementing that information on a case-by-case basis based on what's there. I like to relay any kind of hazard information that we may know about. I know in BLM, we have a lot of abandoned mine lands, in certain parts of the field office, and they're not very well mapped. But we know of areas where it's maybe a little more concentrated than other parts of the field office. So as we start sending folks into those situations, it's important to relay those hazards.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it a little more too, but on that incident commander piece, if it's multiple jurisdictions, recognize that it may necessitate a unified command. And you know, certainly, well, and in light of the leader's intent piece is, you know, those unified incident commanders should be right hip to hip and making those calls in a unified fashion.
So I think we're going to do another breakout. Let's take another 7 minutes and let's talk about these two questions. So what do you need to think about every time you get an incident, and what changes as the incident goes from initial attack to extended attack? So let's take 7 minutes. Let's be back at 10 after in the main room and we'll talk about it. Group 2, what do you need to think about every time you get a fire?
For group 2, we were talking about team transition. If you're going from IA to, do you need a type 3 team or above? Cost sharing agreements. If there's potential multiple jurisdictional agencies that are involved or could be involved. The logistics side of supporting an expanded incident, if it's going that direction. Another one was as it goes from IA to extended, if you need to bring back your IA resources and look to start swapping them out with supplemental resources for an extended attack incident. And then if it hasn't been done yet, starting the preparations for the LIFDUS and the various delegations of authority and what the objectives are going to be.
Awesome. Yeah. How about group 4? Anything you want to add to that?
One other thing we talked about is the folks you have going to the fire. We're getting a lot of younger folks in and less experience. So checking on the folks that you have going to the fire and make sure they're going to be able to handle what they're headed to, if you need to get different people en route to help them.
Yeah, make sure you've got folks qualified to do the job. Anything else? Let's do one more. Group 6. Do you guys have anything else to add?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and hit this one. Just kind of along the same lines, but you know, I'm thinking more kind of right resources for efficiency in case you you know, get additional fires. You know, have a fire in the wilderness. You know, looking more towards those aerial delivered firefighters. You got fire that, you know, ground resources can get to a little quicker. That way you're not tapping your resources on something that you might need them for down the road. And then just kind of thinking about kind of your weather forecast is something our group talked about, and you know what it looks like as far as, you know, is it going to get some relief? You know, is it just going to get worse? You know, was it, you know, a thunderstorm that you got that had a little bit of rain, but it's going to dry out quick? So kind of some of those thoughts.
Lonnie, anything to add?
That's good. No, we could have Doug come and be a duty officer for us. It's exactly what we're thinking. Yeah, we're thinking about the next fire, very cognizant of what initial attack resources we are going to dedicate to that particular incident. We're going to designate something, and the rest of the resources that are participating with it can continue that suppression effort and still be available for another fire from that incident.
Okay. It's not a good sign. So now we're into extended attack. So I think I heard some folks talk about the complexity analysis. I guess by show of hands, just real briefly, how many folks have done a complexity analysis? Just raise your hand, do a reaction. Yeah, lots of people. Okay, anybody not done? Complexity analysis, raise your hand. A few, that's okay. Okay, so complexity analysis, we've made a decision that this initial attack is going to grow beyond the scope of our initial attack resources and our objectives. We're not going to be able to contain this fire with the resources we have. We need to be doing a complexity analysis and revisiting that. And basically, well, Lonnie, maybe you can talk more about the complexity analysis. I'll butcher it.
Yeah. No, I'm sure you wouldn't. Yeah, a lot of the units, especially in the Pacific Northwest, they have conveniently put the complexity analysis in the incident organizer. So for initial attack, your initial attack IC has that incident organizer. That stuff's right there. You can document it. Otherwise, that is in the Red Book. And I think I'd point out to folks that there has been some recent changes to that complexity analysis, and particularly in light of the complex incident management teams. There's now discussion, which jumping ahead a little bit, but there's a discussion where you need to look at the different functional areas in ICS and actually rate those complexity elements down. But once again, that's going to be the key document, the key analysis piece. Your agency administrator is going to want to know the results of that complexity analysis, as well as other leaders, the dispatch center, your state office, all those folks. That's the interagency tool that we use.
Thanks, Lonnie. So we're also going to be having a conversation about risk. Part of that complexity analysis is risk. But really what I guess we want to emphasize here is when we start talking about risk analysis, this should be a conversation between your duty officer and your agency administrators about values at risk and any potential, I guess, courses of action and what the potential risk is to our firefighters on the ground, and weighing that balance of are the values at risk something that warrant a more aggressive strategy, and is that something that is even possible? So having a careful conversation about what that looks like and making sure we're taking care of our folks on the ground first and foremost. Part of that conversation also is probability of success. You know, we talked a little bit about that the other day when we talked about ISAP. I don't know if anybody has had an opportunity to go back and look at that video that Heath was trying to play the other day, but there's a lot of conversations about probability of success. And the number we usually get when we ask people what the probability of success is 80%. But the reality is most of our strategies and most of our fire lines, only about 35 to 40% of them are actually successful. And so having an open and honest conversation about what that probability of success looks like is super important, especially in the context of the risk conversation. Talked a little bit about resources already. Making sure that we have resources not only to fight this fire, but resources to fight the next fire. And so do we have enough folks on board to be able to take on another IA, or are we going to need to ask for some help? How are we going to handle that? Lonnie, anything to add on the resources piece?
Yeah, I'd add on to that is, obviously in that transition from initial attack to extended attack, you're most likely not going to have all the resources that you need. It takes mobilization time. The likelihood that you have all that is very unlikely. So make sure that your incident objectives are commensurate with the resource mix that you have out there. And maybe an extreme example is like this thing has just launched And with the resources you have, all you can do is protect the origin and try to get an anchor on it until more resources come. That's fine. You know, make sure that you're working with your agency administrator and you're clearly communicating that leader's intent to those incident commanders that that is your incident objectives for now.
That dovetails right into our WFDS decision. So I heard a couple of folks talk about WFDS, the importance of WFDS as we go to extended attack. Important to document our decision. I think the point I want to emphasize when you talk about WFDS is when you put together your WFDS decision, the first 24, 48 hours that you're doing that, it does not need to be perfect. It's important to get it out the door and published first. You can publish this thing as many times as you want. There are certain triggers that require you to publish a new WFDS decision, but there's nothing that says you can't publish it and amend your previous decision as you gain more information. So like Lonnie says, maybe in that initial 48, 72 hours in that initial transition, maybe all you have, and maybe the resources that you have are only enough that you can protect the origin of this thing. Okay, so we're going to put that in as an incident objective, and that's going to be our rationale. We're going to talk about why we're doing that. Now, 24 hours later, maybe you have more resources at your disposal, and the weather is changed, and you have a different situation entirely. You can go back in and revise that WFDS decision to reflect your new incident objectives. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good here, I guess, is the lesson.
Yeah, and remember the WFDS is just for the federal agencies. So, if it is, let's say, a state jurisdiction fire that burns onto federal lands, a WFDS is still required, and that jurisdictional agency will be responsible for it. Not to belabor this, I know we've talked a fair amount about WFDS, but I do think that there is some importance to having, like Curtis said, that a published decision for when you're in briefing your incoming incident management team, so that that incident commander can actually have some direction and know what the special management considerations are for the management of that fire.
Just continue to make it better as you go. So based on all this information, you've had your conversation with your AAs and your ICs and your fire staff. You understand what the risk is. You understand what the complexity of the incident is. You've talked about probability of success. Do you need a team? Yeah, probably. We'll say yes in this case. So let's talk a little bit about different types of organizations. Earlier in the presentation, we talked about during your IA period, most of the time, those folks are going to be the folks that are going to be ICing those incidents for you are going to be your type 3, 4, and 5 incident commanders. If your complexity analysis indicates that it's more complex than one of those 3 incidents, as your values at risk rise, as your risk to firefighters increases, as your complexity of the organization, the number of people involved increases, you're starting to inch more towards this CIMT territory. So your complex incident management teams. Now these take the place of the old type 1 and 2 organizations. So when we start talking about incident management teams here in the Pacific Northwest, we have a number of type 3 incident management teams that exist in both Washington and Oregon. These organizations are typically pretty light, and in terms of personnel, they're also teams that can be mobilized very quickly and demobilized and demob just as quickly. So if you order up a type 3 incident management team, it's plausible that you may have that team in place ready to engage within a few hours, or within a 12-hour period, and they can demob just as fast. If you order up, but they might only show up with, say, 20 people. if you order up a complex incident management team, they might show up with anywhere from 40 to 70 to 80 people. And so they carry a lot more horsepower. They bring a lot more resources to bear on an incident, but they also take time. So be prepared to do that. Anything to add on that piece, Lonnie?
Yeah, there's a lot there. You know, certainly with when ordering a CIMT, the desire and the intent there is that the agency administrator can interface with the incoming incident commander and negotiate what that roster looks like. So say, for example, through your complexity analysis, when you're evaluating the functional group of finance, let's say it's a very long duration, multi-jurisdictional fire. Well, you may you may want to have that discussion with the incoming IC and say, hey, I think we're going to need 2 finance section chief complex people for this particular incident. You know, you can build that for your needs. So keep that in mind and review that complexity analysis and those functional evaluations that are in the red book now. Be pretty important.
The other piece that I'll talk about before I leave those different organizations, I guess, is it's fairly common for you to come down between different organizations when you do your complexity analysis. It might fall somewhere between a type 2 and a type 3 incident. And so you may have to juggle the concept of, do you need a type 3 incident management team, or do you need a complex incident management team? And when you find yourself in those conversations, it's important to, especially when you have multi-jurisdictional fires, to get together with your partners, have the conversation about what makes sense, and also to have some situational awareness about what's going on in the region, so that you have your best chance of success. So there's a lot that goes into those discussions, but we won't get into all of it here, but just know that that's not something you want to do in isolation. National Incident Management Organizations. We met Jason Loomis yesterday. He's an incident commander with one of the NEMO teams. NEMO teams are kind of a specialized organization. There's only a handful of those teams around the country. They're pretty effective in a couple of different roles. They can manage long-term incidents in many cases that maybe don't necessarily have they have not, I don't want to say that they don't have as complex of there's not a level of complexity of those incidents, but they may be more long-term incidents that you're managing for certain objectives, like veg management objectives, those kinds of things. They're pretty effective at that. They provide a lot of training to various organizations throughout the fire world. Anything else to think about on this one, Lonnie?
Yeah, they namely come with your commanded general staff. So everything else are pretty much ordering in. And just like Curtis said, they definitely have a lot of different uses, but traditionally, historically, they've been used for some of those incidents that are projected to be on the landscape for a long time. They have the ability, the nimbleness to take days off, rotate in, and be that consistent management for you, which is super helpful as an agency administrator for keeping that incident within the objectives.
Unified command can happen at any level of the organization or at any complexity level. Basically, unified command boils down to, in particular, when you have multi-jurisdictional fires, you and your partners are basically going in together saying, we're all making this, we're all part of the decision-making team. We're all setting the objectives together, and we're making decisions on the same page. Anything else to add on that one, Lonnie?
Yeah, I recently had the opportunity to sit through the operational briefing for the Palisades fire, which was virtual. And on that incident, they had eight different unified incident commanders that were all either city or county. It was pretty impressive.
A lot of moving parts there.
Oh boy.
As opposed to each of those incident commanders and their agency administrators just doing their own thing. So unified command is, I would say it's highly recommended. It works pretty well when you get your team on the same page, and everybody's kind of pushing in the same direction. Then area command is not something we see a lot of. It is still an organization that exists, but it's most often utilized in areas where you have a lot of complex incidents occurring in a geographic area at the same time, and you may or may not have enough complex incident management teams to manage all of those at the same time, or it just makes more sense to organize ourselves in a fashion where the agency administrators or the various jurisdictions that are providing leadership and leaders' intent on what we want to see out of those incidents, instead of having to go to 4 or 5 different incident management teams, sometimes it's easier to just go to one incident management team and then they disseminate that information and formulate a strategy from there. So as Lonnie just mentioned, down in California on the Palisades fire, you had 8 different incident commanders working on that incident. You had multiple fires in the area. Might have been a good candidate for an area command team to come in and help kind of oversee all of the moving pieces on all of those incidents. They're pretty effective at helping to organize shared resources. They're effective at helping to move different resources between units and between fires, those kinds of things. And they typically just come with a command and general staff, just like a NEMO team. But they can be an effective tool. Anything else on that?
They're kind of a in between your complex incident management teams and then the GACs. And they're really prioritizing what resources and needs are for a handful of incidents. And, you know, in that realm can be pretty effective. But typically you won't see that unless it's preparedness level 5 and you got a bunch of incidents going on.
Relatively uncommon. So we don't need to belabor this too much. Oh, we got a question.
Yeah. What is the time frame for use of an area command? That would be like if I'm not mistaken, it would be for a longer duration. So you'd be looking at incidents that would require multiple 14-day assignments for incident management teams, that sort of thing.
So decision making when it comes to what kind of incident management team do you need? We don't need to belabor this. We talked a little bit about this, but basically you're going to make that decision based on all the information you have on the table. So you're going to look at your complexity analysis. You're going to have the conversation with your agency administrators. Like I said, it's not uncommon for you to have, a complexity analysis that splits you down the middle between incident types. And so having a conversation about not only what's going on your current incident, but having some situational awareness about what's going on operationally within the region, within your own unit, those kinds of things can help influence those decisions. Availability of resources down the line. If you're PL5 and you know there's only one team available, and you have strong inkling that this incident might get more complex as it goes, you might want to hedge your bets and order that complex incident management team rather than a type 3 team. So anything else to add on?
I'd just briefly add is like Jason Loomis talked the other day, there's 44 complex incident management teams and those numbers are going down. So, you know, there may be a day and time when you need a complex incident management team and they're not available. Be very cognizant with all of your working partners on what you're going to do in that particular scenario. And once again, my recommendations, conversations that we would have is manage that with another team to get you help. So perhaps it's a type 3 team or something in the meantime until that's available, but ensure that your incident objectives are commensurate with that team's capabilities and what they can do. So don't ask them to do something that is beyond what their level of abilities are.
I'm seeing another question. I assume they're requested the same way. I believe that's true. Correct, Lonnie, that you order them just like you would any other incident management team?
Absolutely. It's all ordered through the dispatch centers. It's the jurisdictional agency's responsibility to order that incident management team.
Okay, so whenever you order an incident management team, there's a lot of different components that go into that. There's a lot of information that we want to be preparing to provide to that team. You're going to start thinking about where are we going to have the end briefing? What time are we going to do it? You're going to want to start having the conversation of when are we going to transition from the local IC and local resources to the new incoming team? A lot of times, as incident management teams are coming into town and they're starting to provide resources to your unit, sometimes they can start plugging in resources pretty fast and shadowing some of the folks that are in the field. Sometimes they need another day to get some situational awareness, and so having kind of some situational awareness about work to rest ratios and making sure that your IA resources that have been on this incident for a while are getting the rest that they need is super important. In its most basic form, you're going to have an in brief with a briefing package that you're going to provide to that incoming team. That briefing package is going to detail out a gob of information that you want to convey to the team. It's going to talk about your communications capacity. It's going to talk about different contact lists. It's going to let the team know who your aviation manager is, who your agency administrators are, who your safety managers are, those kinds of things. Typically, it'll include some basic information about the region as well, and some of the maybe previous fire history that's occurred in some of those areas. A lot of times it'll include some weather data as well. You'll want to prepare some leader's intent for this. We talked a little bit, or we're going to talk a little bit about in briefing, I believe tomorrow, and what that looks like, but basically task, purpose, and end state. What do we want this team to do for us? Why are we asking them to do it? And what does success look like at the end of the day? So you don't need to make this a big, in-depth sort of a document for them, but you do need to be able to provide them with enough information that they understand what it is you're asking them to do and why. So as part of your leader's intent, you want to make sure that you're including your WFDS decision. This is it goes hand in hand. So I like to have kind of a summary document that's basically here's the quick and dirty of what I'm asking the team to do. But if you have more in-depth questions about the why we're doing it or specifics about incident objectives, they can go back to that WFDS decision and it's all in there. It documents all the resource or the values at risk. It documents the hazards. It documents our strategic objectives, our incident objectives, rationale, all of that's in there. And last but certainly not least, you got to have a delegation of authority that delegates the authority to that incident commander to fight that fire for you. And that, I mentioned this the other day, should have signatures from every jurisdiction that's affected by this fire. Anything else to add to that, Lonnie?
Yep, they're coming to help you on your bad day here, you and your delegated partners. So really all of this is getting the appropriate things that they need in order to make, to allow them to be successful and help you out. Commonly, if there's challenges with incident management teams, it's often because of a lack of communication. And maybe it's a lack of communicating a particular tactic, what works well. Maybe it's just a contact that you failed to mention, or perhaps, partnerships in the community that you need to emphasize and want that team to continue to work on for you, but you didn't tell them to go do it. So all this just centers around, they're there to help you out, and you got to communicate with them and get them all the tools so that they can be successful for you.
We got a question in the chat that I might kick to you. Why can't ADICs sign the delegation of authority?
So ICs we can't have administratively determined ICs for those complex type incidents. And so they don't have authority to participate in the delegation of authority. It has to be an IC that is accredited through the Stafford Act, basically. So a part of the suppression agencies.
That's Lonnie. Okay, how are we doing on time, Ed? Good. When do you need us to wrap up?
Probably here in about 8 minutes.
8 minutes. Okay. So maybe instead of going to a breakout, why don't, in the chat, if you were arriving to lead a firefighting effort on public lands with numerous issues, what would you want to know? So think about it from the perspective of an incoming incident commander. You've been asked to fight this fire. What do you want to know? Just drop it in the chat. What are the issues? Yep. That is your jurisdictions, priorities. Yep. And as an agency administrator, sometimes it's hard to pick. You're going to have staff that come at you with 15 different priorities, right? It's going to be your job to try to pin that down into what's the most important priority. Political issues. Yep. Local politics, sensitive political or cultural issues. Yep. Where are the gators? Yep. Bears. Been on plenty of fires where you had to issue bear spray. Probability of success. Resources on scene and order. You guys are on it. I like it. All good stuff.
It's their poison oak. I like that.
Okay, you're in brief. We're not going to go through this in detail. There's a whole nother module on this. But basically, this is your opportunity to tell the team that's incoming what's happened to this point. How did we get here? What do we anticipate it's going to do in the next 24, 48 hours based on current predicted weather patterns, topography, terrain, fire history. We all know the value of having local knowledge of an area. We used to have a fire operations supervisor here who'd been here for a very long time. Used to joke about having fought every fire in the Wenatchee field office at least once or twice. So, and there was some truth to that. He'd been on every strip of ground virtually where we have a lot of fire. So, so having that local knowledge is super important, and providing the team kind of a perspective on what do we think is going to happen. Doesn't mean it will play out that way, but it might. Contact, cooperator lists, who do we need to talk to, when do we need to talk to them, etc. Maps, everybody speaks map. So having good maps up there that you can sit and point to is super important. It's value added for everybody. Everybody can understand things a lot better when you can point to it on a map. And then values at risk, key resources that you want to protect. What are your priorities? So we'll go more into this tomorrow. More on leaders' intent. So what are your objectives? Again, task, purpose, and end state. Incident objectives and requirements. So incident expectations and requirements. So is this a full suppression fire, or is it something where we want to manage fire on the landscape to achieve certain resource objectives? How are we going to manage initial attack during the course of the incident? It's fairly common for that to be within the temporary flight restriction area. It's fairly common for us to tell a team that and establish that, but that's open for discussion early on. Public information and liaison officers are invaluable when it comes to working with teams. It gives you your kind of lifeline to not only the public, but the team as well. We don't need to go through all of these. Finance, we talked a little bit briefly with Glenda about agency administrative responsibility for managing costs. Just understand that sometimes it takes costs time to catch up. And so if you go to your finance staff first day and ask them for numbers, they're probably not going to have them for you. But just be patient. They're working on it, and they can give you a best guess usually. Suppression, repair, and damage and repair. Somebody did have a question about backfires on that have damaged fence and whether that qualified as suppression repair. My opinion is it does not. So this is
Glenda would applaud.
Be present and be available. This is one of the most important things as an agency administrator that I think it's hard to know what that means, right? So being present and be available. It used to be when we showed up with an incident management team, we all drove to the ICP and set up our tents. And as an agency administrator, you were there for the long haul, or you might be there for the in brief and then you went home. But that incident management team is still going to have ongoing questions. And as that incident evolves, they're going to have a need to bounce ideas around with you. They're going to have need to get approvals from you on certain actions and tactics. They may need additional information on the local community. And so you need to be available somehow, whether that's physically in person, that's the best if you can pull it off. If you're not available in person, make sure that they have your phone number and that you can be reached. Today's age, technology has allowed us the ability to do a lot of virtual stuff. And so if they can get you on a Teams call or a Zoom call, that can work as well. But just the most important thing is you need to be able to tell the IC that when he calls you, he or she calls you on the phone, that you're gonna answer the phone and be able to help them answer their questions. Anything else on that, Lonnie?
No, I think you covered that.
We're running out of time. I'm
Yep.
gonna burn through a bunch of these. So we kind of talked a little bit about this. Let's skip that one. Managing resource, I'm gonna skip that one too. I talk about reads and resource advisors. So you have resource advisors and you have resource advisors that are fireline qualified. Couple of questions that you're going to have to ask yourself is, which one do you need? If it's a relatively small incident and it's fairly remote and your values at risk are limited, you may not need a resource advisor that's fireline qualified. They may be able to do a lot of the work that you need them to do from your office and provide you the information you need. Want to make sure that those folks are made available to the team, especially the operations folks, so that they can help feed information to those operations folks on potential areas of avoidance, such as retardant restrictions or cultural resources, those kinds of things. But it's important to understand your resource advisors shouldn't be telling your incident management team what to do. That's only your agency administrators. I'm going to jump ahead here, but who does the read brief work for? They work for the agency administrator. They do not work for the team. So as an agency administrator, that resource advisor is somebody who's kind of my eyes and ears in the field. They're on the fire line. They're in there office. They're feeding me information on what the values at risk are that I can then convey to that team. And then last but not least, what does the IMT need? They need to have somebody that can help feed them that same information as well. So, and provide context to it. Okay, glide path. So transfer and glide path. Transfer can mean a lot of things. You can be talking about a transfer to a new incident management team. For long-term incidents, you may have multiple 14-day assignments that are needed to contain an incident. So having a good plan put together on how you're going to transition from one team to another is super important. Or if you feel like you're getting ahead of it, what's the glide path to turn it back to the local unit? So,
yep, it's not uncommon. Also, be prepared to get your turn back standards ready early on in the incident, because utilizing the planning P, those incident management teams are planning for multiple shifts out, and they may be pinging you on day 2 for the turn back standards. Don't let that catch you by surprise.
it's kind of what we're getting at here with this question. What are some of the things to consider? Transfer command, turn back standards are a big one. Suppression repair needs is another. Finance packages, mapping products is super important. A lot of times it's easy to walk away from an incident and not have a clear picture of where your retardant drops are and your dozer lines are, etc. Transfer of command. Whenever we transfer between organizations, whether that's from a local IA incident commander to an incident management team, or vice versa, or between incident management teams, there's potential for failure. There's always a point where having that handoff with a new team, making sure that that communication is crystal clear as to what the objectives are, what the plan is, and how we're going to implement it in a timely fashion, and make sure that everybody understands when that's going to happen. So we want to make sure we have a thorough briefing and agreed upon time to transfer commands. So we're going to spend time with both the incoming team as well as the existing team, talking about what's happened and where are we going. And we're going to have clear time on when that's going to happen. We're going to identify a time for handoff. So we'll say 0600 tomorrow, the new team is going to take command of this incident or something like that. Have a clear idea of who's out there. We want to make sure that all resources are accounted for. We're running out of time, Ed. I'm sorry. Talked about that. Okay, that's it. I think we're going to close it there. Lonnie, anything to add last minute?
Nope. Nope. We'll see if there's any more questions. Not seeing any. So,
more information.
Eddie, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Curtis. Thanks, Lonnie. Let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break here. Let's be back in at 10 after, and then we'll dive into the scenario for this afternoon. So 10 after, be back here in the main room, please.